HQ are very appreciative of the time and energy that you give on a volunteer basis to ASTA. And it's our hope that by starting with this roundtable that we'll start to provide additional support to you. Today's roundtable discussion is very basic because I don't know the chapters well enough to know where you guys are in your development as a chapter, or how far advanced your leadership is in matters as arcane as accounting. So we're going to do a very basic review of the financial records that you need to keep and why you need to keep them. And I hope that this conversation will continue with you guys telling us, you know, well, my particular problem is X, or I don't understand why. As most of you know, it's November, and therefore December, the end of the year, is a major deadline and change from an accounting standpoint. The change occurs because we like to have everything that happened in 2021 either collected, meaning invoicing your suppliers and getting them to pay you within 2021, or if you owe money to restaurants or facilities for hosting events that you put on for your chapter, that you've paid those things by the end of the year. We're very much in accounting about keeping things clean across the change of a year. And so we wanted to get these roundtables out to you now to give you a little bit of time to look at what's going on with your particular chapter, and then we can follow up. So I've got some slides here and we will share them with everybody who's on the call. So please make sure that you record your attendance on this meeting for us. All right, so let me share my screen, and we're going to share this screen of mine because we've got multiple screens in my world to help keep things straight. So today's agenda, we're going to look at basic financial literacy, record keeping requirements. We're going to look at and review a sample balance sheet and a sample profit and loss statement, and then look at how do you go about forecasting your revenue, or what we'll also refer to this as building a budget for 2022. Okay, next screen, basic financial literacy. What we're talking about here is the ability to understand and effectively apply various financial skills. These include financial management and budgeting. And so what we're looking to do is be able to understand what happened in the past, plan for what's going to happen in the future. Since you are volunteers, we in ASTA HQ, Jasmine and I, we're very cognizant of your time and want to make sure that the activity you have to do is done in the most efficient and time responsible manner as possible. We're going to talk about, revenue. We're going to talk about smart business investments, how you choose to spend the money from your chapter, and projecting the future. Purpose of financial records. As you know, we here at ASTA HQ, we've provided you with a treasurer's manual because you have an obligation to keep information and report it to us at HQ. More fundamentally, though, you have an obligation to report out to your chapter membership about how their funds are being collected, increased, spent, drawn down, the complete, activity around your finances. And finally, and some would say most severely, we have an obligation to the IRS. As a chapter, the chapter exists independently of you, the officers. As officers, you don't own the chapter. However, you have an obligation as you're in the officer leadership for this period to supply the records, to keep the records, and to report out ultimately to ASTA HQ and the IRS. So good financial record keeping enables you to track your business. What happens in your chapter? What are the areas that your chapter focuses in on? Are you big on driving membership growth for your chapter? Do you also have an event like a trade show that you put on? Do you have a big supplier engagement focus in your chapter? Those are the kinds of things you're going to want to track to see how you're performing and how you're growing those areas of your business year over year. Planning comes into effect with, we need a 2022 budget from you. You're going to want a 2022 budget to understand, when am I going to need to pay money out? When do I need to make sure I have collected the money so I can pay it out? Legal and IRS compliance and tax preparation are also fundamental reasons for needing good record keeping. To achieve good record keeping, the best information I can give you is to be consistent and to start today. No matter what happened yesterday, the month of October, July, January, don't focus so much on what wasn't done. Right now, today, we can take steps to collect data and information for November of 2021. We can then continue it with December and go on into 2022 with a firm foundation. I find that actually putting a date on my calendar is essential for consistency and to make sure that nothing else comes into my life and diverts me from this activity. I literally, on my work calendar here at ASTA, today is a invoicing day. So my calendar has a block of time that says, AR invoicing, where we're going to send invoices out for 2022 to a lot of our members and suppliers. And by putting it up as a block on my calendar, it prohibits anybody else from booking something to my calendar. And it gives me the ability to say to somebody who does want to pop in, no, I'm sorry, I'm busy right now, but I have time. I have 15 minutes here, or I have 30 minutes there. So it really helps me to take charge of my calendar, which is a challenge. It's always a challenge. So I find that blocking time actually makes it, rise to the level of commitment, and therefore I won't sidestep that commitment in order to serve the person who just happens to call me or just happens to have an emergency on their end of the work relationship. Start today. Again, don't worry about October. Don't worry about January. Start today. The best thing you can do is keep it simple and repeatable. Since I don't know the stages of development across all of the chapters, and I think somebody's got their phone live. If you could mute your phones, that would be helpful to the rest of us. Keeping it simple and repeatable. When I say simple, I go back to the old paper and pencil version of things. Simple is as easy as having a manila envelope, good old office supply store manila envelope. You would have 12 of these, one for each month, right? Make one for each month of the year. And whenever you get an invoice from a supplier, you would stick it in the month of corresponding to the date of the invoice. If you invoice out to a supplier because they've said that they're going to cover your November meeting, and you send them an invoice so that they can pay you, you would put that into the manila folder. When you get the payment from them, you would make a copy of that, stick it in the folder. At the end of November, you would have collected all of the different financial pieces, whether it's invoices coming into you, invoices that you're sending out, payments coming into you, or checks that you're sending out to pay for things. You would have them all in one place. And just having them in one place means that, you know, it's going to be easy to recreate what happened in that month. Many of our chapters, of course, have moved beyond paper and pencil and have gone to Quicken or QuickBooks, which are the two software programs that we suggest. Quicken and QuickBooks are so very simple that if you know how to deposit money into a checking account, if you know how to write a check, you basically can do Quicken and QuickBooks, because they have taken the mystery out of all that double-sided accounting, which is going on behind the scenes within Quicken and QuickBooks. And then Quicken and QuickBooks can create the balance sheet and the profit and loss statement, which are essential to complying with the financial packages that are due from the chapters in July and January of every year. Okay. The most difficult part of all of this is getting the information. As accounting team, we are often not involved in the decision to create a contract with the supplier, with, you know, say, Marriott to fund your next meeting. We are often not involved with the decision to have Joe's Pizza Place come in and provide food and beverage for your next chapter meeting. So as accounting people, we're always having to find and get people to deliver that information to us. So capturing the information is really hard. The best thing you can do is to just keep asking questions of your officers, you know, your president, your vice president, in case they're, you know, making decisions within a smaller group and you're not able to attend. You want to get them in the habit of giving you those documents just as soon as they get them in their hands. This applies especially to things like their travel receipts or meal receipts. Those things are best captured as soon as they happen. And so many businesses over the last 20 months of COVID have converted to doing email receipts so that you don't have to, you know, touch a piece of paper or exchange a piece of paper with another person's hands. That if people are getting email receipts, they should automatically just forward them on to the chapter if the chapter has its own email inbox, or to you as the treasurer, so that you can put them into these folders. And then the other thing you want to do to have good record keeping is you want to tailor it to your chapter's activities. One thing that I know of that happened last week, the New Jersey chapter had a trade show. So they would want to make sure that in their financial records, they have carved out a way to identify their trade show costs and their trade show revenue, because they're going to want to know, how did it perform in 2021? Did it perform the way we think it was going to perform based on how we budgeted for it? And then how did it perform if we look backwards at 2020, 2019, 2018?
I'm on a Zoom call. I can't take any calls right now.
So tailoring it to your chapter's activities is something that you're going to want to have a perspective around, and to be able to modify your chapter accounting records to reflect the things that you guys have chosen as objectives for 2021 and into 2022. Chapter metrics. Metrics is just the fancy corporate word for saying that we want to know how we spent things. And metrics is your trade show, or you have made a commitment to growing your membership in your chapter by 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, whatever it is. That would be a metric. You want to be able to track that. So you want to be able to capture the costs that it takes to do those things. And if you're getting revenue in, you're going to want to track the revenue that's coming in that will help you perform those things. So I've listed key elements here in terms of how I understand our chapters. So you have events, trade shows, meeting sponsorship. If a company, a local business, an insurance business has decided that, yeah, I want to get in front of your members, so I'll sponsor your December holiday party. You know, that would be a meeting sponsorship. Meeting drives, membership drives, and then marketing efforts. Those are some of the ones that I came up with, but please, you know, look at what your chapter does and make sure that you're including the things that you guys do. What the information that you're collecting can help you understand is things that the timing and the legwork involved in putting on the things that you're doing. So you're going to want to take a look at the periods that you're doing the most business. We know that travel itself is a cyclical business. And so your travel business that you run has a cyclical nature to it. People book, you know, in September for, you know, holiday end of year travel. They book in January and February for spring break travel. So you're going to want to look at the chapter from that perspective also. The time for us to work on membership is in this period of the year, but the time to hold a trade show is at another different period of the year. So what are those periods? And then you can see what are the steps you'd have to do prior to that and make sure that you've got a sequence there for money to come in before the money has to go out, those kinds of things. It will also help you identify further sponsorship opportunities when you start to look at it. You might see that you don't have a local insurance carrier or broker who's connected with your team, but you know that is something that, you know, when you put on a trade show, oftentimes you will want from your vendors evidence of insurance coverage to make sure that, you know, if their booth were to, I don't know, catch fire, and that fire would lead to, you know, damages to the whole of the facility, and you, the chapter, have retained the whole facility, an insurance policy from that vendor would help you to cover some of that cost. So you might want to add your local insurance broker because it would give them an opportunity to, you know, expand their business and also help to cover the chapter down the line. The other thing is that you're going to want to report on is which months you promote more travel or more membership or you know, more engagement with your local community. Maybe there's a certain fair or conference that is always held in your hometown. Maybe that's something that your chapter participates in, or maybe it's an opportunity to participate in it. So you're going to want to take a look at those kinds of things. And by having good records, it will remind you of the things you did, the opportunities that you had presented, and maybe opportunities that you could build on going forward. Okay, so now you've taken a look at what your chapter's goals are. You understand which kinds of things you have to keep documents on. And now the question is, well, what do I do with all these documents? As I said, the topmost requirement for these documents is the federal government, the IRS. As a nonprofit, chapters and ASTA HQ, we don't have to pay federal income tax on the monies that we make. However, we have to file an annual income tax form with the government, regardless of the fact that we're not paying any income tax to them. And so we have to keep documents sufficiently robust set of documents, as well as for the length of time that this federal government could come back and ask us questions about it. And since most of us, you know, are not going to be in a leadership position for 8 years, which is the length of time the government could come back and ask you about the 2020 tax return, you're going to want to make sure that those documents are passed down to the next set of officers and passed down to the next set of officers, so that whoever's the officer in year, that would be year 2028, could answer a question about why you spent $5,000 with Marriott Hotel in 2020. Okay, so here's the minimum would be 8 years. And the reason I say 8 years, if we look at the 2020 tax return, the government wants you to keep your 2020 records going back 7 years. So that would be back to 2013. But we file the 2020 tax return in 2021. So from the year we file it and the year you're working on it, you have to go back 8 years to get to 2013. And I don't want you to miss that last final year because you counted 7 years from 2021. So that's why we add the extra year in our presentation here. And if you go to the IRS website, you'll see that they say it's 7 years. Okay, so let's talk about some specific forms that you should have today as a chapter. And if you don't have, you're going to want to go and do a search for within your chapter record. So the first one is the IRS EIN letter. It's also called a CP 575E. This is the official letter by which the IRS issued a tax identification number to the chapter. Some of these letters were issued, decades before we joined ASTA. So I don't presume that you're going to have the record, but it is something that you should look for and see if you can find it. I myself am trying to find them within the ASTA HQ files, and I'm having moderate to not so good success at finding them within our offices. So this is a letter that you want to keep forever. This is a letter that oftentimes, if you want to open up a new bank account or you want to change banks, the bank will want to have an official document that shows what your EIN number is. And this letter is the easiest one to produce if you have it. So you want to keep that forever. Bank account statements, credit card statements, those are something that you need to be able to lay your hands on for the 8-year period, so that if somebody comes back and asks, why you received money, why you paid money, or God forbid, why something was charged back against your revenue for that year, that you would have a document for it. Revenue invoices and the payment, the receipt of the money from the company or individual that you invoiced. You're going to want to keep those. And you're going to want to keep these for the minimum of the 8-year period. The reason I say the invoice and the receipt, again, in the interest of keeping things simple, when you get a check or when a vendor deposit or a supplier deposits the money into your account, if they're doing an ACH payment or if they're doing a credit card payment, you're going to want to take a copy, a snapshot of that document and attach it to the invoice so that you have the two things in one place. The closer those things are together, the less looking you'll have to do for it, and certainly the less looking someone 8 years from now would have to go and find something. So I always recommend that you attach things. If you're making PDF of things, just PDF the two documents together. In Quicken and QuickBooks, you can attach documents within the software system. So take advantage of those capabilities and put the actual physical document with it. Later on, we'll talk about how for some expenses, you need to document exactly why and who. And so writing on those documents and putting down, exactly a description of what this was about. Marriott paid us $5,000 because they were hosting our holiday party 2021. You can write it on the copy of their payment to you. You can write it and put it in the description of the invoice. The more information that's there, the clearer it will be to the IRS and to anyone who comes along after you have gone and be able to understand why a certain thing was paid or received. 1099 forms. As a chapter, you may have paid a company $600 this year to perform a service for you. Maybe they provided $600 worth of food to your chapter meetings across 4 or 5 months. If you've paid a local business $600, you have an obligation to send them what's called a 1099 form. That basically is the IRS making you responsible for reporting some other business's revenue. The IRS has now made all of us who pay small companies, not the Marriotts, not the Best Westerns, not the Carrabba's, not the Olive Gardens, not national chains, but small local businesses. If we've paid them money, the IRS is making us, the payer, responsible for transmitting that revenue information to the IRS so that the IRS can make sure that Joe's Pizza Parlor doesn't try to get away with hiding $600 worth of revenue. And so we do this with a 1099 form. Asset lists. Assets refer to things that the chapter owns. So if the chapter owns a desk and chair or a set of chairs, those would be assets that you need to keep track of. Most of our chapters don't have that kind of formalized setup. So this doesn't apply to a lot of our chapters, but it is something that I've seen on some of our chapters, so I include it here. Profit and loss statements, balance sheet statements, you're going to keep those forever. These are the documents that you today are going to produce for the year 2021, since you are in an officer position right now. And those forms can be paper form, they can be exported from Quicken or QuickBooks if you're on a software system. And those are things that you're going to want to keep forever because it comes up at some future date. Your next chapter officer leadership will thank you for having those around. And tax returns. We here at ASTA HQ file the federal tax return for you. However, chapters that buy, let's say the chapter buys a printer. The printer is going to get charged sales tax. So you as a chapter are going to pay sales tax because we're not exempt from sales tax. If for some reason, and I know of no chapters that this is a possibility on today, but if your state requires a state income tax from the chapter, you would be obligated to pay that. As of today, I know of no states that require an income tax from our chapters. But tax returns, either of the local level, the state level, or the federal level, you're going to want to keep those documents around because audits often occur 3 and 4 years after you've actually made those filings. All righty. Next. Best practices. So again, we go back to the fundamental. You have to have a document collection and retention system. It can be paper. It's perfectly legitimate to have a paper form, but papers need to be copied. So like if you've ever gotten, and I know all of us have, and I just got back from PBS, so I have a whole slew of these nice little point of sale receipts, which I have to get to be able to support the charges that I put on the ASTA credit card. These receipts fade over time. If I go back to this receipt in even as little as 2 months, there'll be parts of it that I won't be able to read. So you have to really PDF these things or, make a physical copy of them to make sure that that ink maintains its vibrancy going forward. So your document retention system needs to take into account those kinds of things. Your document retention system also has to take into account the fact that you have to make sure that those things are secure and that they're passed along to the next leadership as you leave office and the next person comes in. You can choose, and we do recommend that you choose an accounting software to be able to keep better track of things, a more formal tracking of things. And as I said, Quicken and QuickBooks are the ones that we recommend, but there are other systems out there that are perfectly acceptable. And you want a system that is going to allow you to attach, in the form of a PDF, attach this document into the system so that it's always there and it's always able to be retrieved. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to match receipts to invoices, and you can also match them to the bank statement. So every month you should be reconciling your bank statement against the entries in your Quicken or QuickBooks or your handwritten ledger. You want to make sure that no check came in fraudulently and took money out of your account. You want to make sure that no check got lost and somehow a vendor hasn't cashed a check. And you want to be able to reach out to them and say, what happened? Did you not get it? Let me get you another one, whatever that is. Especially, again, as we reach the end of the year, you want to clean up those little things so that they don't carry over into 2022. And most importantly, with your record keeping system, keeping it backed up and secure is essential. Whether it's a paper system or a computer system, you're going to have copies of it. You're going to want to make sure that you hand off those copies to the next officer class. This can be physical boxes of documents going over to them. It can be a thumb drive going over to them. Most of the software platforms today are driving you to go to a cloud-based version of that software. The cloud-based version provides longevity and the backup and the security of your records, but it only works if you're passing along the password and ID to the next person who takes over your position. If you don't pass along that information, then you've got no backup. You've got essentially no records for your chapter. So the next slide actually talks about, a little bit later on, we'll talk about how you want to be able to put in processes for your chapter around the passing along of documents and records. Right now, we're going to take a look at the balance sheet and profit and loss statement. So balance sheet is a record of the chapter's assets, liabilities, and equity. This document is most often going to come up when you have to do your budget for us. So at the beginning of the year, you're going to produce a balance sheet at July when we ask for the half-year financial documents, and you're going to produce a balance sheet as of December 31st when you file your full year documents with us starting in February. And the balance sheet is going to be pretty simple for most of our chapters. You will always have something in the form of cash. Some of our chapters don't have a bank account because they take in less than $2,000 a year. So they would have like a box, a metal box, envelope, something where they're keeping that cash. And that cash would have to be reflected on the balance sheet that you have so much cash in your possession that belongs to the chapter. If you have cash in a bank account, of course, you're going to want to have that recorded as well. As I mentioned, there aren't going to be a lot of assets for our chapters, but there might be some who have ownership of a printer or a fax machine, or I don't know, chairs and desks, that kind of stuff. Liabilities is going to be one of the areas that comes up most often in your balance sheet. because a liability is anything that you have received and accepted services on, but you haven't yet paid them. So for instance, we just had October 31st was the end of a month. We're now in the month of November. If you're the New Jersey chapter ship who had their trade show on October 27th and 28th, right at the end of October, they may owe money to a vendor. And because the 31st was a Sunday, they haven't yet paid the vendor. A balance sheet dated October for the New Jersey chapter would show payables of whatever amount, 1,000, 3,000, whatever, meaning they accepted services from a vendor on October 28th, but they've not yet paid that vendor. So they have an obligation, and that's what a liability is. It's an obligation of the chapter to some other entity that hasn't yet been paid out. Owner's equity. There are two areas here that you're going to see in your balance sheet when you do them. The retained earnings represents the value inherited in the chapter over the lifetime of the chapter. So this is from inception until it would be 2019. That would be the retained earnings. Whatever the prior set of leadership earned and added into the chapter's value would be reflected in what's called retained earnings. When you do the 2021 records and create your December 31st profit and loss statement for the chapter, whatever profit or loss your chapter incurred would show up on this line, the net revenue or loss from the P&L. That would be this year's amount of money. That will then add to the lifetime money, and you'll come up with your new total owner's equity. One of the things as a non-accountant, you're going to want to look at your balance sheet. Total assets here, you'll notice, equals total liabilities plus owner's equity. These two numbers will always equal each other if the balance sheet is properly reflecting all the entries. So if you get to a point and they're equal, it means that you've matched everything up and you're good. If you get to a point where these numbers don't match, it indicates that there's something missing from your records, some entry that has yet to be made in order to make them equal. Okay. Profit and loss. This is really the document that you're going to live in. And the amount of time that you spend in this document is going to be related to how active your chapter is. At a minimum, you're going to do this document every month because you're going to want to capture for each month of the year what activity went on. So at a minimum, it's going to be monthly. But if you're a chapter that has a lot of events, you might be in here as frequently as every week, updating your records, reaching out to your fellow members to make sure that they send you the invoice for their for the meal that they had with, Marriott Corp in trying to arrange, your year-end party. You're going to want to make sure that you're getting those things as close to the actual activity taking place, and you're going to want to record them as soon as you know of them. And the P&L is something that's always done on a monthly basis. So you would be able to look at this document over the course of the year and see those trends that we were talking about. High activity, low activity. Oh, money comes in February, but it actually goes out in January. Well, we got to figure that little hiccup out. The P&L is also going to be something that if you've got Quicken or QuickBooks, you literally go into Quicken and QuickBooks and you can ask it to produce a report for any period you want. I can ask it to produce a report for just 1 month. I can ask it to produce a report from January 1st until October 30th. It can produce a report from January 1st to November 9th. It has the capacity to do any period that you put into its filters, And so that gives you a chance to look at things across periods or just down to one period. The balance sheet and the profit and loss statement are part of your financial package that you have to submit to ASTA HQ. Again, we ask for a June 30th package, so everything from January 1st to June 30th needs to be submitted in the month of July. And then everything from January 1st to December 31st has to be submitted to HQ starting February 1st up to March 15th of the following year. I want to spend the last couple of minutes here talking about some expenses that require special attention. And again, the primary motivator for this discussion is the IRS. The IRS, in recent years, there were changes to the tax rules that didn't permit businesses to expense 100% of their meal and entertainment expenses. That was lifted during COVID. And for us as a nonprofit, it didn't always come up as an issue for us anyways, because we're not paying taxes. But regardless of whether we pay tax on it or not, we have to adhere to the formulas around meal and entertainment receipts, which means we have to know the who, what, why of the expense. So going back to my little receipt here for $4.55, it's not enough that I just make a copy of this and I give it to accounts payable and say, here, that's what I spent it on. I went to the Starbucks and I got a coffee. That's not enough. I need to say that this was for me, an employee, to distinguish it from being for my daughter. Not that she went with me, but you get the point. And I need to say this was related to PBS so that we can associate a business reason for me to be traveling through the DFW airport on November 2nd. So that's the kind of detail that you need to have. And of course, the person who incurs the expense is the one who can tell you these things. It's not on you to discern or divine through some crystal ball what and why the reason. Have them put it on there when they hand you the receipt. Travel expenses, same kind of thing. You have to know what business purpose was. The IRS is suspicious that people put their personal travel or their personal meals into their businesses in order to, compensate them for their time and effort. So the thing is what was the business purpose? Who are the business people who attended? That's the information we're looking for. And just write it on the receipts. That's perfectly fine. Mileage reimbursement. So it's not always the case that somebody flies or takes the Acela or some other thing. Sometimes people are using their cars to drive to the CPC meeting or the regional meeting or whatever it is that's going on in your particular chapter. So people can get reimbursed for their mileage, but you need to get from them, again, a statement, which is just, they can send you an email. The email just has to say the business reason, the miles, and then the amount that you reimburse them is going to be based on whatever the mileage reimbursement rate the IRS establishes for that particular year. And it can change yearly. So I'll include some links later on for you to be able to check the IRS website to see what the mileage reimbursement rate is for a particular year. And then finally, gifts. Again, gifts goes back to the notion that sometimes people like to put their personal stuff through the business to, provide them with additional income that they wouldn't otherwise be eligible for. So if you're doing gifts at the end of the year, for instance, you give food baskets to some of your major suppliers to thank them for their support. You just want to be able to say, what was the business reason of it? As long as it's business reason and you write it on the receipt, we'll have no problems. Okay. Next steps. So this is all a lot of information. Some of you, I hope, are very familiar with it already, and this is has not been new. But what might be new for all the chapters is, you know, how do you maintain your records today? If you haven't had a conversation, or you didn't get a box or a thumb drive of documents from the last person who held, you know, the treasurer's office, then you're going to understand that you're missing some things, and you're going to want to make an effort to find those things. And you can certainly reach out to us at HQ to see if we can come up with some of those things. I'm particularly thinking of that EIN letter. So we can help to provide you with that foundation of key documents that the chapter should always have its hands on. You also want to look at, well, if I didn't get the documents from the last person, how am I going to make sure I transmit the documents, the knowledge, the ID and passwords, if we're using a cloud software system, or if you're using a old-fashioned client version of Quicken and QuickBooks, i.e. you have the old disk that you install it onto your laptop. Well, that disk is going to have to go to the next person so they can install it on their laptop, and then you're going to have to give them a way of embedding the files from the prior years into their laptop. Whatever those processes are or aren't, you're going to want to take efforts to build that process now so that we can have solid records going forward. And then, does your chapter have any written policies, particularly around paying vendors or reimbursing your fellow officers? In the treasurer's manual, we provide guidance about some policies, and they basically come down to, if you are being reimbursed for any amount of money, you don't want to sign the check that reimburses yourself. You want to have one of your other fellow officers who is on a signatory on your checking account do it. You want to create a little bit of separation there so that you're protecting yourself and you're protecting your chapter. With vendors, you want to make sure that they always have to send you a document. It shouldn't be a verbal thing, and you are sending out money to companies without them having to send you a document. You also want to make sure that with your vendors, you're collecting from them their federal ID numbers, their legal names. A lot of companies, the sign above the door says Joe's Pizza Parlor, but in effect, their legal name is 575, Corporate Drive, limited partnership or something. You would never know, but you will know because you'll be asking them for their federal ID numbers and a record of having them sign for these, for giving you that information. Okay, as I mentioned earlier and along the way, we have several deadlines that are coming up right now that I want to bring to your attention so that you can start to plan, the level of work that will need to be done. And when I say, these dates, it's perfectly fine to do things earlier than the deadline. Nobody ever got in trouble for doing things earlier, so long as you're getting all of the information in completely on that earlier date. So December 31st, the end of a year is as important as the end of a month in accounting world. We want to be able to clearly identify what happened in 2021 and separate that out from what happened in 2022. So you're going to want to collect any monies that are due the chapter, whether it's membership money or sponsorship money. You're also going to want to pay for any services that have been performed and completed in 2021. And I'm making that distinction so that you don't pay for anything someone hasn't done for you. Let's say you have an event coming up on January 4th of 2022. It's in the future. Therefore, you are not going to pay on December 31st for something that hasn't been delivered to you. You're going to want to make sure that you pay it after the vendor has fulfilled whatever commitment at the quality that you were expecting it to be done for your chapter. January 1st to 21st. After the year starts, you're going to want to identify which vendors, which small local vendors, or small mom and pop type of vendors your chapter paid $600 or more in 2021 to. Again, we're not talking about Marriott, Carrabba's, Pizza Hut, Red Lobster. Those are all big enough and dynamic enough corporations that they've got systems in place to track all of their cash that comes in through their businesses. But the IRS is looking for the smaller companies that might be forgetful or inclined not to report everything. So you're going to want to see, is there anybody who rises to this $600 level? Literally, if you paid somebody $599, you're out of this process. $600 is where the IRS set it. And so if you come up with one or two vendors, I can't imagine that for most of our chapters, it's going to be even that many. You're going to want to reach out to them. You're going to want to send them what's called a W-9 form. And I'll give you the link on the IRS website where you can download that form and then email it over to them. And the W-9 form makes them responsible for giving you their number, their legal name, their legal address, and signing it that, yeah, I'm telling you the truth. This is true information. So you get the W-9 form from them between January 1st and 21st, and then you're going to create the 1099 form using that information. And by January 31st, you have to mail it to the vendor and you have to mail a copy of it to the IRS. This is not a debatable area. You don't have a choice. I don't have a choice. It has to be done by January 31st. Feel free to do them on January 30th or January 25th or January 2nd if you're able to get everything together and done by that day, as long as it's not later than. And to be sure that you're compliant, make sure you take a picture of the envelope with the, the stamp, have the post office stamp it with the date and take a picture of it so you can confirm for everybody's benefit that it was done timely. When you send the copy to the IRS, I recommend that you do it by certified mail. By doing it by certified mail, you will get, again, you'll get a stamped thing at the time you bring it to the post office that says, I did it in a timely manner. And then when the IRS receives it, they stamp it that they received it so that you get that back in the mail that says, yeah, the IRS received it 5 days later, 7 days later. It wouldn't surprise me if it's 30 days later right now that the IRS receives it. That's not a problem. When the IRS receives it is not your goal or obligation. Your obligation is when you sent it. So do it by certified mail, get it stamped. You'll have that immediately. You'll make a copy of it. You'll make sure that it's passed along with all your permanent records. When the IRS sends you back, you get a little green card that the IRS says, yeah, I signed it. Who signs it, who knows, but they'll have a date on it. They send it, it comes back in the mail to you. You include that with it. You want to make sure that happens because then you can be sure that the IRS received it. And that's obviously the goal of this whole operation. And then finally, starting February 1st, you would be eligible to send your financial package to ASTA HQ. Your financial package will include a copy of these 1099s along with the copy of the IRS one. It'll include your balance sheet and your profit and loss statement. It's got to include a budget for 2022. So if you and your office or team are meeting in January and develop your budget then, it's ready on February 1st. You can meet in December or even November and develop your budget for 2022. All of that could be ready on February 1st to send over to ASTA HQ. The last date that you're to submit your stuff to us is March 15th. March 15th gives us here in ASTA a small window of time to make sure that we're able to review your records, come back to you with any questions or clarifying remarks that we need from you, and then to file your tax return with the IRS by the deadline that we have to meet. And we do 52 some returns here. And obviously, one person, me, doing 52 returns, I need some time in which to look these things over and prepare them properly. Okay, as promised, some IRS websites that will help you to find forms, or if you're interested, you can read on IRS regulations. The most general website is irs.gov. Once you're on that, they have a search function, and you can literally, type in whatever it is. You can type in just W/9, and it will come up with the forms. You want to make sure that you get the form that's dated to 2021, because when you put in W-9, it'll give you the form for 2018, 17, 19, I mean, you name it. So you do want to make sure that you get the one that says on the form 2021. The 1099 forms. You can see the form on the IRS website for the 1099, but you are prohibited, as I am prohibited, from downloading the form from the IRS website. This is the only form I know of that you can't download and just make copies of. I'm not sure why, but that's the rule. So you can look at the form, you can read the instructions, you can, ask questions to me about it and that kind of thing, but you cannot just download it, print it, and use it off there. Instead, you can go within the IRS website and order it from them. You can order it, it's no charge to the chapter. You can tell them how many you need, and they'll send a shipment out to you. Or your local office supply store, starting about now, will have a display case. It's usually a portable cardboard display case, and they usually put it fairly close up to the front of the store. And that display case is usually red, and it's got all sorts of IRS forms in it. It'll have W-2 forms in it. It will have 1099 forms in it. And the one that you're looking for is the 1099-NEC form. That's the newest form that the IRS makes us use for most instances. Certainly, I think it will cover all the instances that a chapter would need to send a 1099 out for. Those display cases in the store, they usually give you an option of buying 10 forms at a minimum, 25 forms or 50 forms. I've never seen anything smaller than 10 in those store display options. So if you're wanting something smaller, the IRS would be the way to go. Obviously, the store-bought ones have a charge to them. And then just for curiosity, IRS nonprofits who file an IRS 990 form, that's the name of our tax form, is a nonprofit. 990 forms are visible to everyone for every 990 and company that files under that designation. So if you give money to United Way, you can go to the IRS website and look at the United Way's 990 form to see how they're spending the money that you give them. Same is true for ASTA chapters. You can see prior years 990 forms, which will help in collecting those for your chapter key document transmission and retention. So this site that I've given you is one where you can log in, create a login and do it that way. You can do it just by going 990, ASTA, New England chapter, and you can put that into the search and you'll get it to come up in just that easy of a search method. All righty, that is the last of my slides. I do want to know any questions that anybody has, or if there are any questions in the chat. I'm looking for that right now. Virginia Peterson has a question in here. She asks, do you want any copies of articles of incorporation or IRS letters that old chapters might have? Yes, that would be lovely. Very helpful indeed. We have articles of incorporation for ASTA HQ. We don't always have all of the chapter level articles of incorporation. So yes, I would appreciate any sort of help in collecting those documents so that we too can be a source of documents for the chapter going forward. All right. I don't ever recall getting the annual tax return after completed. Well, that's you know, I don't know that. You're right. I don't know if you do actually get those. Most of the chapters, because they are less than 50,000 in revenue in a year, the IRS says if you have less than $50,000 in revenue, you can actually file a 990 postcard. And so that's what most of the filings are for the chapters. As I said, you can go into and search for chapter tax returns and download them from the web. But I can also send you the ones that I can find in our files. And like I said, I'm going through the same process you guys are. I'm going out to the web and I'm looking for documents and I'm pulling them in when I can't find them in the records here at HQ. So you and I will do some of the duplicate work, but as long as we get it into the chapter level documents so that you have a good robust set going forward. Okay, let's see what else I've got here. I've got, okay, so here's somebody who's saying chapter equipment most likely could include public address and AV equipment. Yes, if your chapter has bought AV equipment of some kind, then yes, you're going to want to have the original purchase invoices for that equipment to establish how much that was worth when you bought it. And then there's a process in accounting where we depreciate the value of the equipment over the length of its useful life. And then your balance sheet would show that over time, the value of your AV equipment diminishes down to you know, a point where it becomes zero again. So yes, that would definitely be among those assets. Okay, let me see who else is in here. Is the chapter treasurer's manual 2020 available, including required forms? Yes, I believe it's been sent out. It's been sent out starting at the beginning of this year, but I'm happy to send out, you know, other copies to other people. Just reach out to Jasmine or I, and we can send it out to you. We use a particular venue for several board meetings with dinner and maybe 2 trade shows with tips included on all. So this venue would get a 1099. Yes, so let's distinguish if this venue is Marriott Hotels or Best Western or whatever. If it's a national brand like that, they probably are sending you invoices, and those invoices probably have all sorts of tax identification number already on it from them. So if it's a national corporate chain, you are relieved of having to send them a 1099 because the government is really looking for the local companies. So let's identify who this venue is, and then we can ask them if, you know, if they're a corporation and they, you know, if they give you their W-9 and they're a corporation, then you would be excused from having to do a 1099 for them. Okay. What if the chapter president pays the venue and then is reimbursed by the chapter? How does the 1099 go? Okay, so the chapter president should not personally be paying for anything, because that then creates that confusion over whether this is personal or it's company. So you really want to get your chapter president not to be doing these things, but instead have the chapter do these things. Now, perhaps your chapter doesn't have a bank account. Maybe that's why that's not happening. But in a situation like this, I'd have to go back and take a look at the records since during COVID, they did change some of the rules. They alleviated some of the requirements. I'd like to go back and check and see what conventions we're under for 2021 before I answer this. But going forward, I would really get away from doing it that way and make it a chapter event that the chapter actually pays for. You know, the chapter president, you know, yeah, it's not the best way to do it. Okay. Let me see what else is on here. I think that's all that's in the chat that I can see. If anybody has a question and wants to unmute. Okay, so Marilyn replied that she would like us to send out the resolution of this issue of the chapter president paying for things and who the 1099 goes to. Okay, I can do that. All right, if there are no questions, that concludes our presentation for today. Again, I would ask that we continue this dialogue by looking at your particular chapter's nuances and coming up with the right information so that you have the information and skills that you need to do the best job for your particular chapter. All right, and with that, we are finished, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you so much for your volunteership to ASTA, and thank you very much for attending our event today.